Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
Hi, Reverend Green. How are you?
Great, great, great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. We will be going, we will start our conversation shortly. We are just waiting for our CEO. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Today is indeed a big day, isn't it, Reverend Green?
Yes, it is a constant reminder of the work that we still have to do, and yet the progress that we know is required to move us forward. So it's a very heavy day, but very reflective. Thank you all for this week of action that you all are doing to continue to lift up the name of George Floyd as we fight for police reform in this country.
Yes, I mean, there are so many folks that are really engaged in doing this work. And it really is a community effort. Every organization I think you can think of under the sun has really been focused on really trying to get justice, racial
Absolutely.
justice, police accountability. Um, it is a big one. And so I think we should get started. I'll continue to look out for our CEO. I know he's in transit. But I just want to welcome everyone to joining us this Monday um, on the anniversary of the death of George Floyd. It was a tragic death. And we at the National Urban League are actually launching our Instagram Live series, Justice Now, um, really in response to all of the things that we saw in 2020 and leading up to 2020. And it is really an effort to have a bi weekly conversation focused entirely on justice. Um, because we know it is critically important at this time. And I am really happy to be joined um, this this afternoon by Reverend Stephen Green, who is doing amazing work, has a really storied career in social justice from the NAACP. He's also a social justice pastor here in New York. And so, Reverend Green, would you mind just telling our viewers today a little bit about yourself and your background and also your involvement in the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, which is really one of the chief reasons that we are having this conversation today.
Sure. And once again, thank you to the National Urban League and to President and CEO Mark Morial, who will be joining us shortly here on this conversation, and to, of course, to you and to all of those who helped pull this conversation together. The National Urban League is one of our legacy civil rights organizations, and as someone who's worked closely with them, I see President Morial is in here
Um,
now.
the
Uh,
Continue. I didn't mean to cut you
Okay,
off.
no
You were getting.
worries. Yes. From the time of the NAACP working with the Youth and College Division, work closely with the Urbanly Young Professionals as we all
Hey,
collectively,
here I am.
hey, here we go,
Hey, what's up?
try to work together to help push this country forward, right? And I think that's what we recognize as historically as these as legacy organizations, as students of legacy organizations. We know we have what it takes to take this country to the next level because we've done it before, right? We stood
Mhm.
up in the face of lynching, we stood up in the face of Jim Crow, we stood up in the face of economic injustice, and now as we look towards the world beyond this moment a year later and beyond the death of George Floyd and the conviction of Derek Chauvin. We're looking into true police reform in this country and accountability. And today represents that. It represents the growth of a movement in 6 continents across the world. People took to the streets to really affirm that Black Lives Matter. And now we are a year later looking towards making that an indelible mark into the heart of this nation through police reform legislation.
Well, here. Thank you. You already started us off with a sermon today, Reverend Green. So thanks for that. And now we have our president and CEO, Mark Morial of the National Urban League. Mark, thanks so much
Hey.
for joining us. We know you're a busy man, but we also know how important this day is. And so I'll turn this over to you just to kind of give us a few remarks and
Yes.
set the tone for the conversation.
Thank you, Jerica, and thank you, Reverend, and thank you for joining us today. I know you are in demand, and Jerica, I want to just make sure that all the Instagram followers know that Jerica Richardson is uh, a key member of our leadership team as the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice, and she's leading our effort to really lean in post George Floyd into, Reverend, what you talked about, police reimagination, re-envisioning reform. It's important for everyone to realize that the policing system is the entryway to the criminal justice system. It is a component of the criminal justice system. It's the funnel which sucks many of our people in to the criminal justice system, into the trap of the criminal justice system, and to reform it and to reimagine it and to re-envision it is the call of today. It is the call of today. I reflected, like many did, on a year ago, and how I felt when I first saw George Floyd. And I was watching television and saw what was happening. I stood up, and as though I was there, I started yelling at the television, "Get off of him! Get off of him! Why are they on him like this?" And you could see uh, the citizens and the people who were surrounding, pleading, and exhorting those officers to give him or render him aid. Uh, in America, we there's a narrative that we are a land of compassion and a land of justice. And in 2020 and 21, to see such injustice, it has to compel all of us, no matter what, whether we're teachers or nurses, whether we're bus drivers or forklift drivers, whether we're executives, whether we're moms or dads or granddaughters or grandsons, sons, daughters. We have to be a part of this effort to change what we see. And to be silent is to be complicit. To view it as an issue of simply politics is to not understand its deep, deep roots. And so George Floyd is a martyr. He's a martyr for a movement, like Emmett Till, like Johnny Lee Jackson, like Jimmy Lee Jackson, like Martin Luther King, like Malcolm X, like so many who, in the cause of the struggle, lost their lives. He is a martyr. Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and Eric Garner are martyrs in this movement. They are people. We have to stand for them because they can't speak now. So with this conversation here on Justice Now, we're going to be doing this, right, Jerica, every other week on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Wednesday? Tuesdays.
It's
Tuesdays
Tuesday.
at 6
So
p.m.
we'll
Let me
have
get
this as a bi-weekly conversation. So twice a month, we'll be tuning in and hope you'll join us to really talk about all the justice issues of the day, because we know there's so many, and it's important for us really to engage across generations. This is a cross-generational movement, right? The fight for the civil rights movement, it continues to this day. And policing and redefining public safety is just one of those many issues that we really have to take up the mantle.
Reverend, I wanted to ask you, the family had an opportunity to spend this afternoon with the president and indeed the vice president. And uh, what's the mood? What's the posture? What's the sense when you reflect on the death of a loved one? It's hard. The support and the outpouring of love helps, but at the end of the day, George Floyd means something, uh, bigger than we may imagine. But this was somebody's loved one, their family member.
Yeah.
What's the mood?
It's been a very somber move for the family this today and even this past weekend as we have had remembrance events. But today in the White House, the members of the family, along with his daughter Gianni, sat in the Oval Office. And for a lot of folks, George Floyd is a hashtag, but for her, it's her dad,
Yeah.
right? And we ask that folks continue to lift them up as they continue to deal with this gaping hole in their hearts as they continue to be reminded constantly of the loss of their loved one. And so when we talk about these martyrs that you mentioned, we also remember that they're people and that they're people who loved them and knew them, and we feel those gaps today in their families that while everyone is remembering and many corporations have had tweets or thoughts and prayers, we're talking about an actual someone that is not at the dinner table tonight, who cannot go to the family reunion this summer, who will not go to her, see her off to prom or go to her wedding. And so we must recognize that this is a reality for so many people in our country. And so they are using this moment to transform their pain into power. And I think it's truly a testament of their resilience. This is something that they did not sign up for, something that they did not ask for, but they have literally been thrust into the global community on the front stage of this global crisis and are handling this with dignity and with respect. And so I commend them for their efforts as well. And I'm also grateful that the President of the United States took the time today, and the Vice President, to invite them into the Oval Office. And as much as we are grateful of their leadership, they also are reminded that it was the death of George Floyd that sparked an engagement of young people towards from protests to the polls, right? And so that the
Yes.
election of President Biden and Vice President Harris was even more heightened because of what we experienced on May 25th, 2020, and it became a do or die election for a lot of people. And so we're seeing that shift take place in this country, and I'm grateful that the president and vice president opened the Oval Office for them to be able to meet today.
Well put. That people cannot forget the significance of the George Floyd moment and the protest movement in drawing a line about the importance of this past election last
Yeah,
fall, and the connectivity and the sensibility that movements require the politics of protest and the politics of the ballot box and the politics of the bully pulpit and the public square. And these tactics are not in opposition with each other. They're in rhythm and in consonance with each other. But Jerica, I am so excited that you and your team have developed the 21 Pillars, which seeks to take this notion of police reform and present it in a way that people all over the nation and people at the grassroots level can embrace it and advocate for it. Could you talk a little bit about how the 21 Pillars is really a part of the George Floyd movement in America?
Absolutely. In thinking about the 21 pillars, what I actually connect with today and watching the family speak after they left the White House was they reiterated a point that President Biden shared with them, which was the need to get it right, right? To get it right, not necessarily focus on rushing, but getting it right. And so when we think of the 21 pillars that the National Urban League has developed, it is with that in mind. It incorporates a lot of these national reforms that would create more consistency so that no matter where you live, whether it's New York or Nevada, that you have the same expectations and outcomes as in terms of accountability. And so there has been a lot of work on the national level and on the Hill in pushing for a comprehensive George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that is a strong bill, which is exactly what this family, what this country deserves. But in addition to that, our 21 pillars takes those national reforms and also adds reforms that are common sense and meaningful and will have a measurable impact in the lives of everyday people in their locales. So we incorporate some reforms that folks can advocate for in the state and local level. And at the end of the day, our plan is really centered around community and community being at the focus and community being at the table, really to collaborate and define what public safety looks like going forward. The old way just doesn't work. And we've seen that time and time again. So we're advocating for, you know, ending qualified immunity, which is one of the conversations on the national level. But we're also advocating removing police from our schools because we recognize the trauma that it has caused. Although there may have been folks that had good intentions and wanting to have law enforcement to protect children, it's having the adverse effect. And we really need to focus on putting more resources into guidance counselors and social services. So our 21 pillars is comprehensive. It talks about a whole host of things, but I think at the crux of it all is recognizing that we need to be fighting this front for justice and accountability on all levels, local, state, and federal. Focusing on one just isn't enough.
And I was going to just add this, and I think it's important that in this time, we have legacy racial justice civil rights organizations. We are one, having been founded in 1910, NAACP being founded in 1909. The other legacy organizations have their roots, both the National Action Network and the Black Women's Roundtable have their roots in the SCLC. With Reverend Lowry and Dr. King before him, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, another legacy civil rights organization, founded in 1963 at the behest of President Kennedy, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, of course, having been an outgrowth of the NAACP because that was its Office of General Counsel, which was forced to separate by rulings from the IRS in the 1950s. These legacy groups, I think it's been powerful to me to see new activists, whether it is under the banner of Black Lives Matter or under the name of another organization or under no name of any particular organization, join this battle and join this fight. 10 years ago, sometimes I would ask myself, where's the outrage from the young people? Where's the energy from the young people? Now we see newfound energy, newfound commitment, newfound disruption, which I think is an important part of an understanding that this is a multi-generational fight and a multi-generational battle. And what we're all working to do is to leave a better situation than the one that we have found. And I also say it is absolutely necessary to give great respect to the progress we've made. If we don't, we would be disrespecting the generation of Martin Luther King and John Lewis. We'd be disrespecting the work that a Rosa Parks did, or a Malcolm X did, or the many who either were protesters or first generation Black elected officials and politicians and activists. But we face this long road of dealing with the legacy of slavery and segregation, that being institutional racism. And we have to talk about it and help people understand it if we're going to battle it and if we're going to fight it. So on Justice Now, I'm going to be looking forward to Jerica leading dynamic, exciting, informative conversations with guests like you, Reverend, activists, elected officials, celebrities, personalities, people of all generations and walks, and we want those certainly who are following and listening to share their thoughts and their ideas about topics that we can discuss. We've got to empower each other with the power of information and intellectual firepower and facts and persuasive arguments as we work to fight this battle to spur us into action. So I wanted to say that I am going to excuse myself, let you all continue the conversation. As you can see, I'm in transit on my way to another activity. And I just want to thank you, Jericho, for your great leadership here and for hosting Justice Now. Reverend, my thoughts and prayers to you and your work and to the family continuously, and appreciate your perspective and the clarity of your analysis today. So thank you all.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Good. God bless. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mark.
Jericho. Bye now.
So, Reverend Green, I think Mark raised really some important points around the movement. One of the things that I think sticks out for me is there's often the question that folks ask with all that's going on, with incident after incident, just feeling the frustration that something is not happening. Why is it taking so long for change to come on this issue? And I think one of the things that I think about is caste. And, I think it was a powerful book that came out, and it came out at a really, I think, critical time. But what I see is when we think about race in this country, there tends to be a lack of care, a lack of concern, and a lack of compassion when it comes to the challenges and the struggles of Black people. Quite frankly, I think we see it with the brown community and others, but it just seems to be it reiterates itself over and over again. And earlier today, one of George Floyd's brothers just talked about the fact that it is a sad day, but it was also a happy day, right? To see the recognition, to have the most powerful person in the land, to have the vice president and the president meet with the family and just show compassion and how they've developed a relationship and bond over the years. Can you talk to just this idea of compassion, this struggle with caste in this country, and really what we ought to be doing to really push for a more humane world for all of us?
Sure. I think that CAS helps us to see what we have all been thinking but have not been communicating around the entrenching of racism and the embedded racism that is in the fabric of this nation. That this nation was birthed as a nation of division, which is an antithesis to the Americans who were fighting against British imperialism in the United States. And so, for a generation of folks who were fighting against taxation without representation, and for King George and George Washington to be at heads and odds, and yet we are still fighting for this neglect of this dehumanization of seeing all persons as equal. And I think that that is what is truly at the core or the nexus of why we're still fighting this legacy of slavery with policing in this country, is because when we go back to the birthing of this nation, we find ourselves really examining the inequities that are embedded into the very fabric of this Constitution and very fabric of the institutions around criminal justice, around education, around healthcare, and we find them all cyclical, if you will. They all are part of this cycle of injustice, and policing is a part of that vestige, is a part of that legacy. It is a key component of of keeping the institution unjust. And I think that that is why when we talk about George Floyd, we talk about Breonna Taylor, when we talk about Rayshard Brooks and Ahmaud Arbery, we're talking about the very fact that a system does not see Black people as human as they see others. And so we're trying to humanize America. We're trying to make America recognize the very humanity of all persons. It's interesting that this conversation around George Floyd a year after his murder is happening during the same time of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, because these are all two sides of the same coin. This neglect, the dehumanization, the degradation of Black life in this country, whether in Tulsa or Minneapolis, Minnesota, is essentially embedded to the fabric of this country. And so what we're doing is we're trying to remake the nation. And by helping the nation to see herself again and uncover the blindfold off of her eyes to see that what we are facing right now requires a drastic transformation. This is not something that can be done. And I'm glad that you mentioned the 21 pillars provides for us a framework of transformation on every level, because it's not just going to be, we're not going to end police brutality with the signing of a pen by President Biden. It would be great. It will help us move a lot further, move the needle further, but it does not erase the history or the legacy of 400 years of oppression in this nation. And even when we see in many states across this country that are banning the thought of banning the tradition of teaching race in this country by banning critical race theory, banning 1619, we're talking about a future generation that will continue to have this blindfold over their eyes while we're trying to help this nation see herself in order to heal herself. And that's what we're talking about, is that in order for us to make this nation a beloved community, as Martin King talked about, in order to remake this nation to truly be true to the ideals that she wrote on paper of being a nation of liberty and justice for all, it causes us to do the groundwork and the nitty and gritty work and the dirty work of rebuilding. You cannot rebuild something without getting your hands dirty, without taking the hammer and the nails and rebuilding and doing the work of criminal justice reform, doing the work of prison abolition, doing the work of education reform, doing the work of healthcare reform, which we've seen the pandemic expose these inequities within our communities. So we must do the work. And I'm grateful that we have organizations like the National Urban League who will join hands with the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, as well as the activists and organizers on the front lines who really amplified this work, because from Tacoma, Washington to Tulsa, Oklahoma, all the way to New York City, like every city was mobilized in the streets this past summer. And that summer of discontent, the summer of rebellion, was truly a confrontation with America, with herself, and some people who were willing to get their hands dirty to do the work. And some of us went to jail, some of us protested in the streets, some of us made signs, but it caused all of us to work together to be able to see the transformation take place in this country. Here we are a year later, and the family of George Floyd's in the Oval Office, and we're talking about police reform and ending qualified immunity all across this country with the passing of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We are truly miles ahead of where we were last year, but we still have work to go.
You're right. You're right. We have to do the work. And I'm so proud of all of the folks, from activists to advocates, to just everyday people that have been doing the work. And you're right. America needs to see itself. And truth and reconciliation is a long time coming. We've seen it happen across the water. We've seen it happen in South Africa and elsewhere. It's time. And those are the types of legislation that is in the House right now. It's in Congress. We're having these conversations, but we actually have to continue to push to make sure that there is some measurable change and a measurable difference. You talked about all the folks on the ground and doing the work. I just really want to lift up young people, and I think it's part of why it's so important for us to have this conversation of Justice Now on Instagram, because we recognize that there is a segment of our population, 34 or under, that are having these really, really important conversations on this medium. We need to be talking about it on Twitter. We need to be talking about it on Facebook. But this is the National Urban League's opportunity really to engage on this platform. We are drawing to a close in our conversation. I tell you, I could go on and on and on. Today, it was really great to hear from you, my Morehouse brother. I just have to
Oh,
acknowledge
yes,
that.
absolutely.
So, right, you were already quoting Dr. King earlier today. So, we
Wow.
recognize that there is just so much work that needs to be done, but I think we are
Thank
all
you.
engaged and committed to the fight. And so, as we close out, I would love to hear from you on this day, and I also invite others in the chat to join and just share their thoughts. How are you personally remembering George Floyd on this day?
Yes. Thank you again, Jerica, and of course to President Moriel and for the National Urban League to engage in the conversation like this tonight is very important and pivotal because it's important to recognize that this is not just a moment, that the 1 year anniversary of this death that really changed the world, it requires us to go further and to really pass the baton so that we can run the next mile of this race, which requires us to do what President Kennedy told the civil rights leaders after the March of 1963 is to bring me a bill and make me sign it. Make me sign the Civil Rights Bill. Make me sign the Voting Rights Act. And now we have it in the House and it's been passed and it is being stalled in the Senate. And now is the time for us to make the president sign this bill. It will not happen by osmosis. It will not happen on Twitter. It will not happen solely on social media. It's going to happen because we're going to pick up the phone, call our United States senators, and ask them to end qualified immunity. Call them and ask them to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and to really put the pressure on this administration so that it will not end after today. But we will continue the summer of discontent until we're all free, because that is truly what we're called to do, to ensure that unless all of us are free, none of us are free. And that's the work that we're called to do, to remember George Floyd today, so that we all can breathe in this country, so that children will grow up in this country knowing that they will be able to not be judged by the color of their skin, but will find their humanity and their dignity respected. And so I'm grateful again to the Urban League and to all that you all do. And I'm excited about being a part of this journey together as we really, truly make America heal and become one together.
Well, that was very inspiring. And thank you so much, Reverend Green, for joining us. Indeed, you're right. We need to take our protests to the polls. We
Yes.
showed that power in numbers. And that's why part of the reason we are here today and able to have this conversation. And we're going to continue taking that energy, that activism, that commitment, that hard work that we are all doing day in and day out. And we're going to turn it into policy.
Mm.
Policy that's going to be meaningful, policy that will change lives. Because as the name of this show really says, justice now. The time for justice is always right now. So thank you so much for
Thank
joining us
you.
today. Thank you to all of those on IG Live who joined us for this conversation. We really appreciated your feedback, your thoughts, and your comments. And we look forward to hearing from you again next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then just to flag for folks, text Justice Now to 52886 to urge your senators to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And remember, we want a strong bill. We need a strong bill that actually truly honors the memory and the sacrifice of George Floyd and all the others that have come before him. The time for justice is now. Thank you all.